Hello and welcome to From the Be All End, the Burnley podcast. This is the debrief episode for Tottenham Hotspur 3, Burnley 0. I'm Andrew Greaves, alongside me Chris Boden and Darren Bentley. We're going to cast our eye over that defeat on the opening day at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Have a bit of a look around the Premier League to see where the runners and riders are after one game, although still with Leeds United versus Everton to come on Monday evening. And also perhaps have a look at the Burnley squad, which is getting bigger and not getting smaller by the looks of things, with players missing out. Scott Parker did talk about that when questioned in his Portsmouth press conference. Plus, new for this season on the debrief, we've got a couple of fan videos. We're inviting fans to send us their reaction videos. We've got 3 old friends of the podcast popping up throughout the show to give their view on that Spurs game. If you want to get in touch and play a part in the podcast in that way, do just drop us a line at BeAllPodcast on Twitter, or if you know one of us personally, as I know a lot of you do, just drop us a message, because we'd love to hear your videos throughout the season. First of all then, Chris, 3-0 defeat. It felt slightly different to previous heavy defeats to Spurs, perhaps because after a bad start we rallied. We conceded the kind of 2 quick goals in the second half, which felt very Burnley-esque at Spurs, or Burnley-esque versus a big side. Slightly different feel, did you think, on Saturday?
100%, yeah. I've how many times down the years have we seen Burnley sort of, set up against? We call them. I mean, they are a big, thick side, but not in terms of achievement Europa League last season aside. But you look at the size of the place and the quality that they always generally have at their disposal. And we've seen Burnley sort of bank in or just struggle to get out altogether against these sides. You concede one, and the inevitable happens. You go on to lose whatever it is, 2, 3, 4, or 5, as we've seen in years gone by. But this was, I'd say, after a really uncharacteristically nervy start. Can we credit Spurs' high tempo start? But give away a really soft goal. But for the following sort of 30, 35 minutes up to half time, sort of really settled and started to piece together some nice football. We looked secure at the back. Spurs didn't really have much in the way of a sniff before half time again. And we've had a couple of decent options. Josh Laurent takes one early and passes it wide of the post, and he has one deflected that the keeper nearly makes a hash of. And the one that a few people this penalty shout that's veering from sort of like people angrily dismissing it to people genuinely saying, hang on a minute, this is a fair shout. Where Anthony's sort of, he's bundled over by Porro. And you can look at it. I mean, I was watching a feed, and Andy Gray and Richard Keys at half time were just basically laughing at it. I mean, how on earth can you appeal for that? And he's not going to get the ball, blah, blah, blah. He's not going to turn in the initial cross, no. But the way he's actually already, in my mind,
heading out towards the ball.
He's on his way, He's on his way out to the left-hand side to retrieve the ball.
Yeah, recycle
and
it.
he might recycle it, he might centre it, we might score from the cross. Now, if that's not in the penalty area, it's given us a free kick. So I think it would have been, I'm one of these. I think, it would have been a soft penalty, but it's worth a conversation. And there's nobody seemed to sort of take that conversation on, to be honest. And see, Scott Parker was, so by the sounds of it, he was hugely frustrated at half time. But again, half time we come out, we were all right for the first 10 minutes, and Hannibal has the opportunity from Anthony's, Walker's great ball, Anthony's magnificent first touch that we've spoken about at length before, and they go and score a wonder goal. And Richarlison won't play like that for the rest of the season. And Kudus already has 2 assists to his name after a whopping 3 assists last season at West Ham. Just one of those. It's clinical. You're up against the clinical nature of teams we weren't clinical with the openings we have, and well, it's not even a chance, is it? The second one, it's just this unbelievable finish. That's what you're up against, isn't it? 50, 60 million pound forwards every other week.
Yeah. And Daz, I mean, you were slightly more realistic in your kind of premonition, shall we say, of how the game would go pre-match. I think me and Chris were fancying a draw. I certainly was. It did kind of play out scoreline-wise how we perhaps expected it. Were you surprised at how slowly we started? Because it felt a bit uncharacteristic, as Chris said, didn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, there's a few young players in there, and it was a big game. It was a big day for the club. It was a little bit of a surprise, though. I have to say that we were so off it in that first 15 minutes. I mean, we barely got a foot on the ball in the first 15 minutes. And it was only when they scored that we seemed to settle. You could almost see Parker in the early stages asking them to push further up the pitch because we were so deep. I mean, we started with 8 defensive players in the 11, so that's probably no surprise. But after that, we managed to get our footing, I think. I mean, Josh Laurent tried to get forward in support as much as he could because at the end of the day, when you're playing with that 8 defensive players, you're reliant on those 3 to do a lot of donkey work. But I thought Josh Laurent got forward in support quite well in that first half. I just think it panned out exactly how I expect it to pan out. You know, we are everybody's favourites to finish 20th in the league. You know, it's no surprise that we've ended up on the back of a 3-0 goal scoreline. We competed in the game. We gave them a game, I think, for half an hour, 40 minutes, but without really ever thinking we were going to get back in the game, I thought. So onwards and upwards, you know, there'll be easier games, there'll be a lot equally tough games, but there'll be easier games, but already next week feels like a massive game, doesn't it?
Yeah, and Chris, slightly kind of frustrating that 2 games in, we're already, or second game in, we're already talking about a massive game. We'll come on to talk about the rest of the Premier League as we, a bit later in the show, but we can't be too disheartened by a defeat on the opening day. You know, we've seen Man United get a defeat on the opening day today. You know, we've seen other teams drop below us. Certainly Wolves against Manchester City and West Ham, as we've mentioned. But, I mean, this team under Scott Parker seems to thrive on being the underdog and that pressure, and this is the culture he's built. Do you expect us to kind of approach the game, or him to approach the game differently next week from maybe a formation point of view? You know, Daz mentioned 8 defensive players in that 11, that starting 11. You know, is it a chance against Sunderland to kind of go, they've probably not been that well tested by what looks to be a very poor West Ham side, actually getting Ugo Chukwu in, who looked good, I thought, when he came on. You know, perhaps solving the right back issue, because I'm not sure Son is the answer at the minute, and hopefully getting Breuer either in support of Foster or giving him at some game time. Do you see Scott Parker making changes for that game against Sunderland?
Potentially, depending on the work that's put in over the week. I mean, like I said, it looks like Breuer's in need of something of a mini pre-season to get himself up to speed. Now, that doesn't sound like a week's worth of work. It sounds like a few weeks worth. And I mean, Son was neither here nor there. He was, you know, didn't have a great game, but wasn't particularly poor, I don't think. But you would ideally have Connor Roberts available, but I don't know how much much game time he's had in pre-season either. So, but you look at the league games last season. I mean, albeit Sunderland's a much changed side. The first game was a complete write-off because of the state of our, the amount of players we had going out the exit door and square pegs in round holes sort of thing, start of last season. But the return, which we were ultimately fortunate to draw with the 2 late penalties, but we didn't really lay a glove on Sunderland last season. And they've obviously, well, I mean, I don't know where they found money, but behind the back of the sofa that they didn't spend a bean last season. And here they are throwing the kitchen sink at it this time around. It's their tails are going to be up, which was particularly aided by the fixture list. Because I think a lot of people would have fancied West Ham at home early doors in this Premier League campaign, because to me they look like they did under Pellegrini, where they look a bit of a soft touch. They've not strengthened the squad. To me, they look a weaker squad. There's a lot of unrest towards Potter from the West Ham fans, and I think it looks like they're all sort of starting to pine for David Moyes now. They didn't realise that they had what they had when they had him. So it's going to be I think it might be a safety first. It might be a safety first job on Saturday, like at home against Leeds last season, where he sort of goes out to, to try and win the game, but make sure we don't lose that, because I think it's very important. We'd obviously love to win the game, but it's very important we don't lose it. I don't want to sound defeatist, but I think a point against Sunderland at this stage, I think you'd sort of take that and move on to the next one. These games are going to be imperative against the sides that are likely to be in and around us, but I think the scales, the way they are at the moment, I think that'll be a decent result.
Yeah, definitely. Let's play his first fans video. So this is friend of the podcast, Nathan Rogers. This is what he thought of the Clarets' defeat at Spurs.
Tottenham 3, Burnley 0. Look, it's not going to be a result that defines our season. I'm not going to sort of go to it's not a result necessarily to worry about, purely because I don't think the performance was that terrible. First 10 minutes, very nervy, very very scatty, very disjointed. But then from sort of minute 25 to minute 60, pretty good. A lot of patterns of play. We press really well. Lots of good connecting together, good players connecting together. But then 60th minute comes, Richarlison scores a worldie. And then that's it, game over. It's an important lesson in being clinical and being decisive, and yeah, that's all it is. It's welcome back to the Premier League. We need to really step up our game and be clinical and be ruthless. But yeah, not a result to panic over. I'm more happy with the performance, obviously, than the result, obviously. But yeah, we go on to the next one. We just got to be really positive going into the next one, next Saturday against Sunderland.
There we go, Nathan Rogers' view on the game. Daz, I just wanted to ask about formation, because I brought this up on the kind of rapid reaction podcast. When I looked at the goals, especially the kind of first two goals where Richarlison was able to shake off his defender and just take that step back and create space, I wondered whether the playing the five kind of confuses, and I know it shouldn't do because they're professional footballers, but confuses the roles and responsibilities. As in, kind of Ekdal almost kind of went towards the ball because Esteve had kind of been left open, if you will. But then Walker and Son didn't really tuck in. Do you think it's easier to play as a 4 in that position and the 5, that extra man, if all the action is in front of you, you're not sure what's behind you? Does it confuse people a little bit?
I hear you, but I think more bodies in the box you've got, the better. Roles and responsibilities are there for them all to communicate to each other. I think Ekdal just clearly, for me, loses his man for the first goal. Son loses Richarlison for the second goal, switches off for a second, and you're playing against these type of players who you can't do that. In the Championship, you might get away with it. But at this level, that drop in levels for 5-10 seconds kills you. In the Richarlison's still got 2 fantastic finishes there, but he's had the opportunity, hasn't he? The ball's landed to him. There's nobody challenging. We saw the Man United Arsenal game. A couple of challenges in the box. You get a couple of blocks in. Last minute blocks. There was one near the end when Saka had a chance. There's one near the Saliba's thrown himself at one. Those are the defensive strengths that you need, and when you've got more bodies in the box, you've more chance of getting those blocks in. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the 5, there's a role to play for that. I'd rather see us with a 4. I'll be honest with you. I'd rather see us with a 4. I think Esteve would rather be in a 4. But the problem we've got is he's not going to flip flop between a 5 and a 4. He's going to settle on a pattern, I would imagine. You'd love to see him go 4 at the back next week against Sunderland, give us that extra body in a more attacking sense. But I think we're stuck into that 5 now. We've got a real problem at right back. I think I don't think Son is the answer at right back. I don't think Ekdal's nearly at the level we need. So we've got defensive problems, but we've got problems at the other end. That's the problem at this level. When you don't spend huge amounts of money, if you're not great in both boxes, the end results are inevitable, I think.
Yeah, Chris, Josh Cullen mentioned the fact that we need to tidy up in both boxes. I mean, the biggest chance probably fell to Hannibal. You mentioned that. Just a word on Lyle Foster. Again, I think we were perhaps surprised that Lyle Foster would be starting a Premier League game for Burnley. I know Zian Fleming's had a bit of an injury hit summer, and we know about Breuer, as you mentioned, that kind of mini pre-season, but Foster did well, didn't he? I mean, there were some really nice patterns of play with Lyle. He linked well with Anthony. He kind of helped Burnley get up the pitch and get at what looked to be at times a fairly unconvincing Spurs defence. Were you surprised at what you saw from Lyle Foster, or do you think the kind of Premier League suits him, even if it's not from a goal-scoring point of view?
I wasn't surprised because, as we said on in Friday's podcast, he's always had the attributes. It's stringing this together on a consistent basis. Now, the Premier League does suit him because he's not coming up against teams who are banked in every week. He's coming up against teams who are on the front foot and they leave space in behind. But they also have, you look at them, they aren't just the best defenders in European world football. They're the quickest. They're the strongest. They're the toughest. Van der Ven's a freak. You see in a centre half there who's got sprinter's pace. More often than not, you see those players sort of in the wide areas, in the forward areas, sort of thing. Ridiculous. I mean, he got the measure of Romero a couple of times, and we're talking. Again, he's a World Cup winner. He's an elite. He's a Spurs captain. An elite centre half, and he caused him a number of problems. And Romero's picking up 3, 4 little niggly fouls here and there, and I don't think he got booked in the end. But he gave him an awkward afternoon. But we're seeing he's got a turn of pace. He's a good shuttle at carrying the ball, getting us up the pitch. As you said, he combined really well on occasion with Anthony, who can get in this formation, can get closer to Foster and sort of play off each other. His hold-up play has come on as well. He looks a whole lot better in that respect, and he didn't have much in the way of a chance. But again, as we said, history suggests he won't get double figures. He just I don't think he's ever done it in his professional career, sort of thing. But I was hugely encouraged by what I saw yesterday, and certainly something to build on. All we ask is, you give everything. We know you're up against the very best, and he gave everything yesterday. I thought he was terrific.
Yeah, and Daz, just on the kind of final point on Foster before we go to his next fan reaction vid, I saw this mention on Up the Clarets, and I was thinking about it myself. Is there a kind of system where, and you might laugh at this, where Lyle Foster becomes the Joe Linton-esque character, i.e. when Newcastle signed Joe Linton, a lot of fans went, well, he just doesn't score goals. His hold-up play is good, his linked play is good, he doesn't score goals. Then all of a sudden Newcastle build a different system around Joe Linton, and he becomes the player that is, God on Tyneside and starts to unlock other forward players. Or is that just would that just be a waste of a space? And I don't mean that in a kind of derogatory manner towards Foster, but have we got better players in the role that I'm suggesting Foster plays? Or is that a chance that he becomes that Joe Linton and we're so hung up on him not scoring goals that we're missing the attributes that he does have?
We don't see him in training every week, so we don't know what he performs like in training, but he's clearly not. The boy's clearly not a goal scorer. Now he could operate a 10, but he does a lot of his best work for me in and around the centre circle and 35 yards from goal, which is probably why he doesn't score many goals. So a 10 might suit him in a deeper role. Is he then going to get forward and get at the end of things Brownhill-like? I don't know. I fear I feel Lyle Foster will probably get shuttled around a little bit. I think when everyone's fit, he'll be the one that drops out. I don't see a future for Lyle Foster in a Burnley side that's trying to score goals to stay in the Premier League. You know, he ain't going to fit out left. I thought Anthony was good, by the way, on Saturday. I thought Anthony looked like a player who could step into the Premier League quite easily, I think. And I think the faith that Parker's putting him in was justified, I think. So if he's not going to play on the left, is he going to play as a 10? I don't think he is. He's not a 9. I think he might need a cushion pretty soon, because I think that bench is going to get quite comfy for him.
Absolutely, there you are. That's my theory on Joe Linton shot to smithereens. And let's get another fan reaction video. This one, again, I'm hoping Martin Barnes, former editor of When the Ball Moves, will dig me out of this Joe Linton-esque spiral that I've got into. But this is Barnesy, from former editor of the Burnley fanzine When the Ball Moves, and a former guest on the podcast. Here's what he thought of the Spurs defeat.
Greetings from a sunny South Yorkshire. I thought we played pretty well, to be honest, yesterday. I think, as has already been alluded to on Match of the Day, we need to be more clinical with the chances that we get. That was one of the main differences. Other than the goals, I didn't think Tottenham ripped us apart or anything like that, or we looked completely out of place. I just think they had a striker, Richarlison, who managed to lose Sonny and Walker a couple of times, and he bagged one fantastic goal. The midfield cover went missing a couple of times, and that cost us for the third goal. There were a couple of players who struggled a little bit, but I didn't think anybody looked awful. And I thought there were a couple of decent performances out there. I was quite surprised that Edwards didn't get longer, but overall, an encouraging start.
There we go. Just to mention as well, Martin running the line at Barnsley versus Worcester City in the Women's National League this afternoon. That's his first league game of the season over in Yorkshire for Barnsley. Let's talk about the squad. He mentioned Marcus Edwards not getting the nod. Do you perhaps expect Edwards, Chris, to come into the side next week? I mean, Hannibal perhaps didn't get into the game. Or is Marcus Edwards one of these players who you think in the Premier League might initially be an impact player from the bench? I mean, he didn't get very long yesterday, but, against a Sunderland or something like that, do you expect him to play a bit more of a impact role or a starting role?
Again, it depends on the system, doesn't it? If we're going to play what essentially is 2 10s behind a forward, I think he is invariably, especially away from home, going to play Hannibal as one, and Anthony's work rate gives him an advantage. Plus his first touch, he's liable to get you an assist or a goal. And I think Edwards is a little magician. I love him to pieces, and I really want to see him given enough game time to prosper at this level. Because physically, you might have question marks against him, but I just think, like I say, with the ball at his feet, he can be that little X factor. He can pick that pass that nobody else in the side can pick necessarily. It can glide past someone that that nobody else can do that. He's not quick, but he's fleet of foot, sort of thing. So it was the goal against Sheffield Wednesday. It was like tied to his boot, wasn't it? He's special. He's special, I think. And the question mark is that he's not done it at Premier League level, but he's done it at a very good level with Sporting, and he's done it in Europe as well. So if he's going to play 4-2-3-1, then I think he's one of my 2 wide men. If he's going to play 2 10s, I'd love to see him in there, but I don't think Parker sees him as, one of his first tube choices at the moment. He had to wait. He was like sort of third or fourth or fifth down the pecking order yesterday, wasn't he? After Sharma and Brun Larson, etc.
He's the one you're going to bring in, though.
Daz,
I think, Chris, you're right. If you go to a four at the back, he's the one you're going to bring in. And a four at the back just gives us that extra body further up the pitch. And at home, that could be pivotal.
Yeah. I'm just looking at squad size. We have got a big squad. Edwards missed out. Brun Larson obviously missed out on a starting berth. Ramsey on the bench as well. Trezor and Koleosho nowhere in the matchday squad. Obviously players still to come in, Breuer and Ugo Chukwu, who did come off the bench. It starts to become a bit of a problem, doesn't it, Darren, now as we're kind of heading towards the end of the transfer window, that, ultimately come 7 o'clock, I think the transfer window shut slightly earlier this year on September 1st. If we've not shifted some of the players who Scott Parker doesn't fancy, we've got some very expensive, let's not call them Rolls Royces, but let's say kind of high-end family saloons sat in the garage down at the Barnfield, haven't we? And that becomes a bit of a problem for Scott Parker, does it not? Because we don't have reserve team football as such anymore. We don't have an outlet for these players. These players aren't necessarily going to be ready to come in should we go through a real injury crisis. What's your take on the size of the squad, and how many do you expect us to try and ship out, and what's the profile of those players you expect us to ship out?
It's a top-heavy squad, there's no doubt about that, and there's some shifting of timber needs doing in the next, what are we talking now, 10, 12 days, something like that. I think Chris alluded to it on Friday, if you can shift 6 or 7 of these at 3 or 4 million quid a piece, or even get the wages off the books by getting them out on loan and letting other people pay the wages, that can free up a couple of salaries, because 7 out and 2 in looks a lot better, I think, in terms of squad size. I think we're a defender light still. Having seen us on Saturday, I'm worried defensively, and I still think we're a striker light. So we need bodies in the door, and we're crazy. We're talking about bodies in the door, and we've got a massively top-heavy squad. Trezor, Koleosho, I wouldn't bat an eyelid if either of those left. I really wouldn't. They're clearly not going to figure in Scott Parker's squad, so you might as well get them off the books. Trezor's been an expensive mistake, but for the love of God, I don't think we're ever going to see him in a Burnley shirt again. Can't remember seeing him one last time. And Koleosho, for all his pace and direct running, hasn't got an end result. And in the Premier League, we're talking about being more clinical. So those are the two ones straight away that you think, get them out the door. Then you've got the Cherlinovs and the Delcroix and the people like that who are just hanging around the place without a look in. There's some real shifting of timber needs to go in the next 10 to 12 days, and you'd imagine that won't wait till deadline day because he needs some incomings, I think.
Yeah.
I'd be disappointed if Koleosho left, because I think there's still...
Would you?
I genuinely would.
I'm not.
Because I think, we saw for half a season before he picked up his serious knee injury in the Premier League, just huge promise. That pace was there. And again, we might not have seen that end product, but I think that was sort of starting to develop before he picked up his injury. Championship just didn't happen for him. He was running down blind alleys, etc. And again, often against 2 banks of 4 sort of thing. And it was a tough old campaign for him. But with his age, he's an Italian under 21 that's prospering at that level. I don't think you let that sort of player leave the building permanently. Whether we let him go out on loan, it'd be a move back to Espanyol, to our sister club, would make sense. But I'll be loath to just abandon the project altogether. I like seeing players develop, and I still think there's a lot to develop there. Trezor, again, I say he's had a blank slate of a pre-season. He's put the time in. Again, I haven't seen him. We don't know how many training sessions he's had, how many pre-season outings he's had technically. But if he's not in the 20 on match day 1, having had a clean slate to impress Scott Parker, then what are we doing? Just get shut, cut our losses. We'll do well to get a tenth of what we paid for him, given his what he's achieved in his 2 years with us, and write that off as a ridiculously expensive mistake. Well, you can file him under Ben Gibson, etc. Can't you? Just signings, he just didn't happen. At least we got 7-8 million quid back for Ben Gibson in the end. We're not going to get that for Trésor.
No. I have to say, I do agree with Daz. I'm not sure I'd be that upset if Collier did leave. I kind of agree with you, Chris, in terms of, getting him out on loan as a first protocol. I think, just to get him games, get him some development time, because it has been stunted. I mean, I believe I believe Cherlinoff and Obafemi are kind of training with a separate group, so they're not part of that. I did mention to somebody down who's kind of around and about the training ground on a regular basis. Asked them whether they were training or whether they were just basically sat at home waiting for phone calls. But apparently they are training, but they are obviously, trying hard, and the club are assisting them to try and get clubs. But I mean, Daz, we used to whinge about kind of not getting any signings, and we kind of touched on that in as piece with Sean Dyche when we had him on the podcast. The last 5-6 windows has been the complete opposite of that answered, and it's kind of, as you said, it's given us a top-heavy, really unbalanced squad, which makes it really difficult to trim in the right way because, I agree with you. I think we're a defender like Tuanzebe, not fit enough for the 20 already. Worrell, probably is a mirror almost of Ekdal in terms of not got a lot of pace, brilliant defender, but you have question marks at this level. Is that one of the pitfalls of having the project that we've got, is that you do fill your books with players and, you try and get a little bit here and you try and get a little bit there. I mean, we've seen Sambo go out to Sparta Rotterdam. He's one of them I think we picked up for next to nothing, but, he has a good spell in Holland. You might go for 2.5-3 million. I think we saw Bobby Thomas, is it linked with Sheffield United for 8 million? It only takes a loan move to suddenly turn we're not going to mech out on that player into we've made 5 million on a player we paid, 500, 800, 900,000 for. But it does make it difficult, doesn't it? Because you're stockpiling players and then suddenly you're a bit like, shit, we're paying all these wages.
We've shuffled the pack now 3 seasons in a row, and I think I did some analysis, a quick tweet a couple of weeks ago. It's over 60 signings in the last 3 seasons, which is a measure of how well we've done to integrate players so quickly and be successful. Certainly under Scott Parker, to get that team promoted last year, having thrown it together at the 11th hour. But there's going to come a time when that doesn't work. It clearly appears to be the model of the club. Bring them in, buy them young, get them out the door more expensive. You can only keep doing that for so long. We've talked for so long now about the Brentfords and Bournemouths of this world, where they might come a cropper by doing that. And it's a similar sort of model, isn't it, on a lower scale? But you've got to carry a leaner squad. Even Pep Guardiola's talking about his squad being too heavy. When Manchester City are talking about having a squad too heavy, it's a problem. So we've got to cut some timber. We've said that. We've got to get those squad numbers down. If they're not going to get a game, they're not going to feature in the squad, and we've got 3 or 4 options per position, then halve them. Get the bodies out the door, get the money in, and then get some bodies in the door that are going to feature. That's the model, though, isn't it, at the minute? That's the way it seems that Alan Pearson, his ownership model's going to look.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Final. I'd rather have it like this, though, that we've got a top-heavy squad that we're looking to move players out than, like I say, last year when we had a top-heavy squad, moved everyone out, and then ran round last couple of days of the window. At least we do still want a couple of bodies, I think, but we've got the nucleus of things in place, and it's not going to be. Good grief! If you did what we did last year in the Premier League, my word, you'd get punished. Oh, you'd get absolutely walloped. You just couldn't.
We're starting from a healthier base. You're right, Chris. We're starting from a healthier base.
Yeah. Final fan reaction video for this week when we come back after watching this from, again, another old friend of the podcast, Julian Jordan. When we come back from this, we will chat all about the rest of the Premier League. So this is Julian Jordan's view on the Spurs game.
So my take on yesterday's performance is, well, it's a pretty chastening experience in lots of respects. I don't think any of us were under any illusions about how difficult the Premier League is going to be, and how big the gap is between the Championship and the Premier League. But if any of us needed reminding, that was it yesterday. Because what are Spurs going to be ultimately? Maybe a mid-table side this season, and they dispatched us pretty comfortably. I thought after a very slow start in which we conceded a soft goal, we really rallied. So if there is a positive, I would say the remainder of the first half performance after that. In the second half, just before their second, through Anthony's sort of creative work, we did create a couple of openings. I think if Hannibal had got his shooting boots on and got it off first time rather than trying to cut inside, it might have been a slightly different story. But overall, kind of expected, but disappointed nonetheless. But onward and upward. Let's see what happens next weekend against Sunderland.
Definitely. Let's see what happens against Sunderland. As we've mentioned a couple of times, Sunderland 3-0 winners against West Ham. I think we've slagged West Ham off quite a bit and talked about Sunderland. Just looking at the other Premier League scores, Liverpool beating Bournemouth on Friday night 4-2. That was a cracking start to the Premier League campaign. I know we've suggested Bournemouth might be in trouble, but we'll perhaps chat about them in a second. Aston Villa 0, Newcastle 0 in the lunchtime kickoff yesterday. A last-minute Fulham goal, 6 minutes of injury time, rescued a 1-0 draw at Brighton for them. And then Wolves taken apart, as quite a lot of teams are, by Manchester City in the Saturday night kickoff. 4-0 to Pep Guardiola's side. Chelsea 0, Palace 0. Slightly bizarre game that, with the Eze free kick chalked off. Chris Wood up and running 2 goals for Forest as they beat again another poor looking Brentford side. They were 3-0 down at half time in that one. That finished 3-1. Down in Nottingham. And then final game of Sunday, Manchester United 0, Arsenal 1. Chris, I mean, we kind of were trying to work out who might be in the kind of firing line and who the newly promoted clubs might be targeting. We suggested Bournemouth, and I think you said lost 4 of their back 5. To go to Anfield on the opening game of the season and yes, they've been beaten, but they didn't look a bad side, did they? I mean, they certainly weren't overawed by the occasion. Obviously, the first league game since the death of Diogo Jota, a lot of emotions running high at Anfield. They didn't look overawed, did they?
No. I mean, just on that, bear in mind, it's is it a month since the news came through about Jota? I was just watching Mo Salah before the game and saying to my eldest, saying he's absolutely devastated. He's so upset. And you're asking professional footballers to put that behind you and crack on with the day-to-day after a month. Hats off to Liverpool. Hats off to Mo Salah. You could see at the end how touched he was. He was crying and singing Jota. So, I mean, that was spine-tingling, some of that. It was... and the tifo at Wolves as well for Diogo Jota. But looking at Bournemouth, I mean, I think Semenyo was linked with Man United in the summer, and what a great signing it would have been. He had a fabulous season last year, and he recovers from the upset of being what appears to have been. He's reported racial abuse. He's going to be investigated, but the strength of character to shrug that off and say his response on the pitch in goals, brilliant. I think Liverpool, I mean, they certainly looked more open in pre-season. They're definitely the weaker in transition when they do lose the ball high up the pitch. So I don't know whether that sort of plays into, I think everyone suspected that Liverpool were always going to win the game, even when Bournemouth came back into it. With 5 minutes left, I think we all knew there were going to be a grandstand finish and Liverpool were going to nick it. Never mind when 4-2. But I still think they might be one of those sides that they might be safe, but I think they'll be part of the equation. I think Fulham again. Munoz has been linked with. He got the late equaliser. He's been linked with the move away. And have they overly strengthened Fulham? I don't think so. They Silver's on about, if we don't strengthen, we're going to go backwards. Well, if they go backwards, they're in a relegation fight. And let's say you can lump in Wolves, who I don't see many redeeming factors there, and Brentford again, who, as we said on the show on Friday, I cannot believe the appointment they've made, the managerial. You appoint, you have Thomas Frank, who's the work he's done over how many years at Brentford, to then pick a complete and utter novice. I'm absolutely staggered, and they've lost players. It looks like Visser will leave the building as well, so I think they'll be absolutely down there. Forest have won that at half time, haven't they? If you're losing by half time at Forest, I think that's a marker of trouble ahead.
Yeah, and Daz, I mean, you suggested in our WhatsApp group that the bottom five is probably taking shape now, and perhaps Sunderland and Leeds come into that. Fulham perhaps come into it. There's a little bit of heartening kind of reality there that the mini league isn't a mini league of three, and you just try not to finish bottom or second bottom. It is almost this season, you suspect, a mini league of 5 to 7 teams, isn't it? Which for the newly promoted clubs at least gives a bit of a chink of hope to.
Yeah, it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek after one game, saying the bottom 5 has sorted itself out. But you know what I mean. I mean, you can see patterns emerging already in the Premier League, can't you? Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal, all the top. Man United struggling again. But you're right. The sides like Wolves, West Ham, Brentford, Bournemouth. Chris mentions Fulham. I think they'll probably be okay. Leeds and Sunderland, they're all in it. It's a Premier League of 3 leagues now. It's your top 6, top 7. It's your perennial Premier League teams like Crystal Palaces and Evertons and Newcastles and Brightons, those kind of teams. And then it's the rest. And it may well be musical chairs at the bottom. And whoever's in the, not got a seat at the end after 38 games is relegated. But you're right. That gives all the newly promoted teams a bit of encouragement, I think, that you've seen established Premier League sides getting battered this weekend. Even early in the season, that's got to be promising to see Wolves conceding 4, to see West Ham conceding 3, see Brentford conceding 3, Bournemouth conceding 4. That you're not alone in that. Sides at the bottom of the league will struggle defensively and struggle to score goals, and it's picking up the right results at the right time. And that can be when you play teams as well, by the way. That can be about when you play them. We've all got everyone to play, as Sean Dyche once said. You've got to play them all home and away, but it can be when you play them that's crucial. So, and that's what makes the Sunderland game so important next week for me, because, after that, the Man U's, Aston Villa's, Chelsea's, we've got some tough games coming up at the start of the season. 3 points next week would be a massive fillip. Might even lift you to halfway up the table. I've only played a couple of games, but you're halfway up the table after a couple of games, and you look at that with your chest puffed out, don't you? So, big game coming up for Burnley, I think.
Let's leave it there, chaps. Thank you very much for your company. We'll be back later in the week with our usual pod. Don't forget, you can follow us and subscribe on YouTube. Just click the button below the video if you're watching there. And a big thanks to everyone who's tuned into our kind of rapid reaction show. I think we've, in the first kind of 24 hours, well over 2,000 views, including quite a few Spurs fans, which was nice. We're going to be doing those rapid reactions throughout the season. And like I said, don't forget, if you do fancy doing what Julian, Nathan and Martin did today and sending us your rapid reactions after the game for us to play out in the debrief, just get in touch at BO Podcast on Twitter. So the Clarets start the season with a 3-0 defeat, but plenty of positives to take out of that defeat in North London. Like I say, we'll be back later in the week, and until then, up the Clarets.